Picture this. It's a cold night somewhere in Africa about 300,000 years ago. There's no roof over your head, no walls, no fire, not yet. Just the sound of the wind cutting through tall grass, and somewhere out there in the darkness, something breathing, something large. You are not at the top of the food chain. You are not even close. You're small, you're soft. You don't have claws, you don't have fangs. A single lion could end your entire family in under a minute. And you know this because it has happened before. You've seen it, you've heard the screaming. So how did you survive? How did something so fragile, so utterly exposed, not only make it through the night, but eventually take over every corner of this planet? How did a creature that couldn't outrun a cheetah, couldn't outfight a bear, and couldn't outlast a cold snap end up building cities, painting ceilings, and landing on the moon? The answer isn't what most people expect. It's not raw strength, it's not size, it's not even intelligence alone. It's something far more human than that. This is the story of how early humans actually lived, not the cleaned-up version from a textbook, not the stone tools behind a museum display case. The real version, the messy, brutal, deeply fascinating truth that most of us were never taught. To truly understand how early humans lived, you have to let go of almost everything you think you know about prehistoric life. Most people picture it like this: a lone caveman draped in fur, carrying a club, grunting at his family around a fire. Primitive, almost animal. But that image is completely wrong. The humans we're talking about, early Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, were not simple creatures. Their brains were virtually identical to yours. The same capacity for language, the same ability to plan ahead, to feel jealousy, to remember the past, to imagine the future. The same emotional depth, the same social complexity, the same capacity for creativity, for humor, for grief. The only real difference between them and us is the tools they had access to. That's it. So when you picture their daily lives, don't picture animals. Picture people. Real people dealing with real problems on hunger, danger, love, loss, boredom, ambition, with far fewer resources than we have today, but with every bit as much raw intelligence as anyone alive right now. That's where we start. And once you accept that, everything about how they actually lived begins to make a whole lot more sense. Let's talk about food first, because food was everything. It was the absolute center of daily life in a way that most of us in the modern world simply cannot relate to. Early humans didn't have grocery stores, they didn't have refrigerators, they didn't have a predictable schedule. What they had was a landscape, vast, unpredictable, and full of both opportunity and danger. The old image of early humans as pure hunters, strong men taking down enormous animals every single day, is mostly a myth. The reality was far more complex and honestly far more interesting. The truth is, early humans were opportunists. They ate whatever they could get, and most of the time what they could get was small. The backbone of the early human diet wasn't woolly mammoth or giant bison. It was roots, tubers, berries, seeds, nuts, insects, eggs, small lizards, and the occasional unlucky rabbit. These foods were reliable, available throughout most of the year, and, crucially, far less likely to kill you in the process of obtaining them. But here's where things get really interesting. The women in these groups were often the primary providers of calories, not through hunting, but through gathering. And while hunting gets all the glory in the popular imagination, gathering was what actually kept communities alive day after day, week after week. A successful large hunt might happen once every few weeks. Gathering happened every single morning without fail. Women moved through the landscape with an encyclopedic knowledge of the terrain. They knew which plants were edible, which were toxic, which roots were only safe after being cooked, and which berries came into season at what time of year. This knowledge wasn't written down anywhere. It lived entirely in human memory, passed down from mother to daughter across thousands of generations. It was one of the most sophisticated and critical bodies of knowledge in the entire ancient world. And it left almost no archaeological trace, which is part of why history has so consistently ignored it. And then there was meat. When early humans hunted, it was rarely the heroic one-on-one standoff that movies like to depict. More often, it was a highly coordinated group effort that required planning, communication, and a deep understanding of animal behavior. Groups would work together to drive animals toward cliffs or into natural traps. They would track prey for miles, reading footprints, broken branches, and disturbed earth with a level of skill that would astonish most people today. Some groups practiced what researchers call persistence hunting, chasing prey across open ground under the midday heat, not with speed but with sheer endurance, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. The human body, it turns out, is extraordinarily well designed for long-distance running. We don't overheat the way most animals do. We sweat. We breathe rhythmically. We can cover enormous distances at a steady pace in conditions that would be lethal for a four-legged animal. And early humans figured this out and weaponized it. When a hunt was successful, nothing was wasted. Not a single piece. The meat was eaten. The bones were cracked open for their marrow. The organs were consumed first because they were the most nutrient-dense. The hide was saved for clothing or shelter. The tendons were kept for cordage. Even the stomach might be used as a water container. Early humans had a relationship with animals that was simultaneously brutal and deeply respectful, because they understood in a very direct way that their survival depended entirely on the health of the ecosystem around them. Now let's talk about shelter, because this is another area where the popular image gets things almost completely backwards. Most people hear prehistoric humans and immediately picture caves. And yes, caves were used. They offered natural protection from the elements and were relatively easy to defend. But the vast majority of early humans didn't live in caves. They couldn't. There simply weren't enough caves to go around. Instead, early humans built shelters, real shelters. Structures made from branches, animal hides, bark, and grass that could be assembled in a matter of hours and dismantled just as quickly when it was time to move on. Some of these structures were remarkably sophisticated. Layered hides stretched over a framework of bent branches anchored to the ground and sealed against the wind with packed earth or moss. Archaeological sites across Europe and Africa have revealed the remains of these structures. Post holes in the ground, arrangements of stone used as anchors, concentrations of animal bones and charcoal that tell us exactly where people slept, cooked, and gathered. These weren't crude piles of sticks, these were homes. And this brings up something important. Early humans moved a lot. Most early human groups were nomadic or semi-nomadic, following the seasonal movements of game animals and the ripening of plant foods across the landscape. This wasn't wandering aimlessly. It was a carefully managed system, refined over thousands of years, that allowed a group of people to survive in a specific region by using its resources sustainably without exhausting any single area. Some groups had seasonal rounds, routes they traveled year after year, arriving at specific locations at specific times to take advantage of salmon runs, nut harvests, or the migrations of large herds. This kind of knowledge required an intimate, multi-generational understanding of the land that goes far beyond anything most modern people possess. Home wasn't a fixed address. Home was the group you traveled with. And speaking of the group, let's talk about society, because this is where early human life becomes genuinely surprising. Early human groups were small, typically somewhere between 20 and 50 individuals, though they maintained connections with much larger networks of related groups across the wider landscape. Think of it like this. Your immediate group was your family and closest neighbors, but you also had extended ties, trading relationships, marriage alliances, shared ritual practices, with dozens of other groups across a territory that might stretch for hundreds of miles. These connections were not casual. They were essential for survival, because when disaster struck, a drought, a disease, a particularly brutal winter, the groups that had strong external alliances were the ones that survived. They could call on others for food, for shelter, for support. The groups that were isolated died. Inside the group itself, life was intensely social. Decisions were made collectively. Leadership was fluid and situational. The best hunter led the hunt. The most experienced elder guided major decisions. The most skilled healer managed medical crises. There was no permanent chief, no inherited authority, no rigid hierarchy. This is actually one of the most fascinating things about early human society. It was deeply egalitarian by necessity. When you live in a group of 30 people with no walls between you and no ability to hoard resources, domineering behavior is socially fatal. Groups had powerful informal mechanisms for keeping anyone from becoming too controlling. Mockery, ostracism, the withdrawal of cooperation. Archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests that this kind of enforced equality was the norm for most of human prehistory, and it's only with the rise of agriculture and permanent settlements that rigid social hierarchies begin to appear consistently in the record. Inside the group, relationships were everything. Who you could trust, who you owed a favor, who was a reliable partner in a crisis. This social knowledge was just as critical as knowing where the nearest water source was. People invested enormous energy in maintaining relationships through sharing food, through grooming, through storytelling, through ritual, and yes, through language. If you're finding this fascinating, make sure you subscribe. We release documentaries like this regularly, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Language is arguably the single most important technology in human history. More important than fire, more important than the wheel. Because language is what allows one mind to transfer knowledge directly into another mind. Not just behavior, but ideas, plans, memories, warnings, and stories. Early humans had fully modern language. This isn't speculation, and the anatomical structures required for complex speech are present in our ancestors going back at least 300,000 years. They talked, constantly and about everything, but language wasn't just practical. It was also the foundation of something that set early humans apart from every other species on the planet: the ability to create and share fictional realities. By fictional realities, I don't mean lies, I mean shared beliefs. Stories about the world that a whole group could hold in common and coordinate around, even though those stories couldn't be directly verified by any individual's personal experience. Beliefs about where the group came from, beliefs about what happened after death, beliefs about the forces that governed rain and fire and the movement of animals. These weren't signs of ignorance. They were an extraordinarily sophisticated social technology, because when an entire group shares the same story about the world, that story becomes a source of cohesion, of meaning, and of identity. It gives people a reason to cooperate with strangers, to sacrifice for the group, to endure hardship without fragmenting. Every human group that has ever been studied, in every corner of the world, at every period of history, has had these kinds of shared narratives. That universality tells us something profound. It tells us that storytelling isn't a luxury or a hobby. It's as fundamental to being human as eating or breathing. Now let's talk about something that almost never comes up in discussions of prehistoric life: childhood. Early human children grew up fast, but not in the grim, joyless way that phrase usually implies. They grew up fast in the sense that they were integrated into the life of the group from the very beginning. From the moment a child could walk, they were learning, not in a classroom, not from a book, by watching, by participating, by doing. A 7-year-old boy in an early human group would already know how to read animal tracks, how to identify dozens of edible plants, how to start a fire, and how to navigate by the stars. Not because he was forced to learn these things, but because they were simply part of the texture of daily life. Everything was a lesson. Every walk through the landscape was an education. Play was also a central part of childhood, and it was purposeful play. Children played games that mirrored adult activities: mock hunts, the construction of small shelters, the practice of tool making with softer materials. Through play, they were developing the skills, the social instincts, and the physical capabilities they would need as adults. It looked like fun. It was also training. Mothers didn't raise children alone. This is another area where the modern image gets things badly wrong. In early human groups, child-rearing was a collective activity. Grandmothers played a particularly important role. Researchers have identified what they call the grandmother effect, the theory that the extended post-reproductive lifespan unique to human women evolved specifically because grandmothers who helped care for grandchildren dramatically increased the survival rates of those children. The presence of a healthy grandmother was, quite literally, a matter of life and death for young children. Fathers were involved too, though the nature of paternal investment varied considerably across groups. What was consistent was the involvement of the broader group: aunts, uncles, older siblings, unrelated adults who had built strong bonds with a family. All of them contributed to the survival and development of children. The phrase, "it takes a village to raise a child," is not a metaphor. For most of human history, it was a biological necessity. Let's talk about death, because death was an ever-present part of early human life in a way that's very difficult for most people today to truly internalize. Child mortality was high. Infections that we treat today with a 3-day course of antibiotics could be fatal. A broken leg in the wrong circumstances could be a death sentence. Women died in childbirth. Men died in hunts gone wrong. The average life expectancy, when calculated across the entire population, was shockingly low by modern standards. But this figure is deeply misleading because it's dragged down by the enormous number of deaths in infancy and early childhood. The individuals who made it past the age of 15 had a reasonable chance of living into their 40s, 50s, or even beyond. And early humans cared deeply about their dead. Evidence of burial practices appears in the archaeological record going back at least 100,000 years. Bodies were placed in carefully dug graves, sometimes in specific positions, curled on their sides as if sleeping. Grave goods were included: ochre pigment, shells, stone tools, animal bones. These weren't random. They suggest deliberate ritual, deliberate belief about what death meant and what, if anything, came after it. One of the most remarkable discoveries in all of prehistoric archaeology came from a site in Iraq called Shanidar Cave, where the skeleton of a Neanderthal, our close evolutionary relatives, was found surrounded by what appeared to be the remains of flowers. Whether this was a true burial offering or the result of burrowing rodents remains debated. But what isn't debated is the accumulation of evidence from sites around the world showing that early humans treated their dead with ceremony, with care, and with something that looks unmistakably like grief. They mourned, they remembered, they told stories about the people they had lost. That, more than anything else, is what separates us from every other animal on this planet. There's one more piece of this story that most people don't know, and it might be the most important of all. Early humans were artists, not in a simple accidental way, not, here's a handprint on a cave wall. In a deliberate, sophisticated, deeply intentional way that reveals a level of symbolic thinking that should genuinely take your breath away. The cave paintings of Lascaux in France, of Altamira in Spain, of Chauvet. These are not primitive scribbles. They are masterworks. The animals depicted are rendered with a sense of movement, of weight, of anatomical accuracy that suggests artists who had spent years studying their subjects. Some of the paintings show animals in motion in ways that anticipate the principles of animation by tens of thousands of years. Some show perspective. Some show scenes, multiple animals interacting, figures in context, narratives unfolding across a rock face, and the caves themselves matter. Many of the most spectacular paintings are not near the entrance, not in the places where people lived and slept. They are deep inside the earth, in chambers that required hours of crawling through narrow passages to reach, lit by small, flickering lamps burning animal fat. Getting there required tremendous effort and, in some cases, real physical risk. Whatever was happening in those deep chambers, it was not casual. It was sacred. Beyond paintings, early humans made sculptures. Small figures carved from bone, ivory, and stone. They made jewelry from shells and animal teeth. They wore clothing decorated with pigment and beads. They made musical instruments, flutes carved from bird bones that are astonishingly still playable today and capable of producing genuinely beautiful music. These people were not just surviving, they were creating meaning. They were building culture. They were doing everything that we today consider essentially and uniquely human. So what happened to them? The early humans we've been talking about, those first Homo sapiens who lived by their wits, their social bonds, and their extraordinary capacity for adaptation, they didn't disappear. They didn't go extinct. They changed. Very slowly, beginning roughly 12,000 years ago and accelerating over the millennia that followed, some human groups began to do something that no human had ever done before. They began to plant seeds. They began to manage animals. They began to stay in one place. Agriculture was not an instant revolution. It was a gradual, halting, uneven process that unfolded independently in multiple parts of the world over thousands of years. And it came with a complicated mix of benefits and costs. Yes, it produced more calories per acre, but it also produced harder physical labor, a more restricted diet, new diseases from close contact with domesticated animals, and the social conditions that eventually gave rise to inequality, hierarchy, and large-scale organized violence. The hunter-gatherer way of life that had sustained humanity for hundreds of thousands of years did not vanish overnight. Many groups maintained it, and in some isolated corners of the world maintained it into the 20th century, offering researchers a precious and irreplaceable window into the oldest way of being human. Those groups consistently report something that surprises most people. They do not describe their lives as hard. They describe them as full. They work fewer hours per week than the average office worker in the modern world. They have deep and continuous relationships with their families and their communities. They have extensive knowledge of the natural world. They have art, music, stories, humor, and ritual. They have everything that makes life worth living. The earliest humans weren't struggling toward civilization. They had already built one, just a different kind than the one we're used to thinking about. The real story of how early humans lived is not a story of misery slowly inching toward comfort. It's a story of extraordinary human beings, people with the same minds, the same hearts, and the same fundamental needs as you and me, finding genuinely sophisticated and deeply human ways to live in a world without safety nets. They figured out how to feed themselves without destroying their environment. They figured out how to raise children without losing them to isolation. They figured out how to manage conflict without permanent violence. They figured out how to face death with dignity and meaning. They figured out how to make beauty in a world that had never asked them to. Every time you sit around a table with people you love, every time you tell a story that makes someone laugh, every time you feel moved by a piece of music or stop to watch the sun go down or feel the particular kind of grief that comes from losing someone who cannot be replaced, you are doing something your ancestors did in the same way for 300,000 years before you were born. Their fire is still burning. We're just holding it now. If you liked this video, make sure you subscribe. We drop documentaries like this all the time, and the next one goes even deeper.